Brandon, if we are ready, it is Wednesday, July 23rd. Welcome to City of Aurora Planning Commission study session. And this evening, we are joined by Trevor Vaughn to give a presentation. And Trevor, is it just you or do we have
just me
another
today?
join? All right, great. Take it away.
Okay, thanks for inviting me. And we had discussed this prior to the meeting. I think, Garrett, you had seen the Colfax Commercial Guidebook, Commercial Property Guidebook that we have produced, and I believe Planning Commission should have received a copy of that electronically. Yep. To try to help code enforcement communicate the standards in the Colfax corridor in regards to mostly the zoning standards. And so, I'm not going to cover a lot of that in review. I think a lot of what the interest was the second half of that guide, which talks about crime prevention through environmental design. And this is kind of our first city document that really, I think, formally addresses that from a public standpoint, kind of the large public communication on that. So the Colfax Corridor Business Commercial Property Guidebook, we've printed up multiple hundreds of copies of these. Code enforcement is going to distribute those and focusing on those unique requirements in the corridor. It's got a lot of history. It's got the unique original Aurora zoning requirements, OAMS and OAG zones, specific sign codes. There are a lot of questions. And then, in regards to the CPTED concepts, we know that in the city, when we look at our statistics and particularly violent crime, that it tends to be sticky in the Colfax corridor, in that East Colfax corridor. So, putting out there for these businesses, particularly with what we're seeing in the corridor, there's opportunities to implement crime prevention through environmental design strategies to help tackle that issue. What's going to be particularly relevant for you guys is, as development happens, not just in the Colfax corridor, but obviously throughout the city, kind of what these concepts mean and introducing them to you. So CPTED, as it's the acronym is used, is the proper design and effective use of the built environment can lead to reduction in the incidence and fear of crime and to an improvement in the quality of life. And so it's not a new concept. This isn't, innovation. This has been around a while. It's implemented in a lot of places internationally in the US. It's adopted oftentimes formally in a lot of jurisdictions, including in Colorado. And it's not that the city hasn't used this, but mostly it's been confined to our police department that has gotten CPTED certifications, but it's very reactionary when you do it that way because they're not the ones making decisions on the actual design built environment. They can communicate that to private property owners, but the built environment is basically what you have delivered in the end to police. Police is what's there. We create what the environment is, and they have to react to it. So CPTED works by taking away those criminal activities, so also adding positive activities. So it's not just structure and buildings and stuff like that, but showing that the would-be offenders, the neighborhood's cared for. The broken window fact, it's not a theory. If a place looks not cared for, well, you're not likely to treat it as well, right? If the norm is everybody litters, you throw your cups down, well, it's been proven through studies that you're more likely to do that. But if it shows cared for, what are the norms? And then also community engagement and activation helps build those norms and strengthen it against crime. So pillars of CPTED, you have natural surveillance, natural access control, and I'm just going to touch on each one of these: territorial reinforcement, activity support, and maintenance. We talk a little bit more about it, but we've had a number of staff that have now gone through training on this, and it's you can really get down in the weeds on this, but I'm giving you a high level of what this is. So, like I mentioned, widely adopted. In some locations, the site plan reviews are and design reviews are reviewed by police. Who have the CPTED standards. I think also if you have that education built in on the front end to it could potentially be done there as well, by planners or my office or whatever, when they're building the environment. So it is discussed in American Planning Association's Policy Guide on Security. And as I mentioned, staff from multiple departments attended a 40-hour training recently, and we've got another 24-hour advanced training next week at the MLK Library that we have hosted. We brought in the National Institute of Crime Prevention to host training here in Aurora, and we actually have people coming in from other states to take advantage of that training. That's kind of how big it is, and it's a chunk of that training's for the city, and we do have 2 people from the planning staff that have gone through the basic and taken the advanced. We've got Caitlin here tonight and Kelly Bish. And I think, Caitlin, what'd you think of the training?
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I thought the training was very good. I definitely learned so much and am already using it in my, development and site plan and permit reviews, and looking forward to the advanced training next week. Sounds like it's going to be more about like site plan review, which will be definitely very relevant for me in planning, as well as it sounds like there's going to be a good amount about public art too. So lots to look forward to.
Yep. Yeah, and so I will say too, as part of that basic training, the final project was actually doing a CPTED project, and we split the class into teams. And we've actually implemented some of those recommendations that we came out with. So if you look at the MLK Library today, our Parks Department took some of the feedback and went there and did a whole bunch of landscape work to clean that up. And it looks night and day if you've been there. And there's more maintenance work to be done there. We did deliver to some of the other properties, including the RTD transit station. So, we actually got some value out of the training itself. I think those studies, if we had more time, probably would have been more in depth on those areas. They kind of restricted it so that you could actually do the presentations on the final day without running out of time. But CPTED is multidisciplinary, as I mentioned, because you've got the front end, the built environment. And it's amazing when we start having these interdepartmental teams to tackle crime issues, who you end up having to call in that you didn't expect in the beginning. It's really, really kind of fascinating. So you of course got housing community services, as far as your CPTED teams, obviously the code enforcement, the maintenance, showing the areas cared for, community engagement. You've got the new derelict properties ordinance to help with that. Licensing, we deal with operations and what I call risk terrain, so who's kind of what you would call in CPTED, the term is negative activity generators, trying to prevent those and assist the positive activity generators in an area. Parks, library, others, you're dealing with the social management piece of that. And then, of course, you got the police that have the enforcement and then provide the feedback that helps you focus your efforts and target your efforts. With that, like I said, it's been adopted. Here's a map of, there's a U.S. CPTED Association tries to track everywhere that it's been adopted by ordinance or statute. Florida recently adopted a statute that says liability increases, a civil liability increases for property owners if somebody's a victim of crime, if they had a CPTED, if they weren't implementing CPTED measures. Florida is huge on CPTED. And it's in their statutes in multiple locations. It's actually required on new multifamily builds. So Commerce City actually has it in their code, and their code talks about, in their code, they just talk about encouraging it at this time. So it's not required. It's encouraged that they consult with it and implement principles on projects. Lakewood on the licensing side, so this is on licensing for the marijuana, their medical marijuana facilities. It has to be a consideration in approval of that license that they've looked at the CPTED measures and conducted that with police. That's adopted by ordinance. These are Colorado examples, as I mentioned. So as I get into natural surveillance, here's a good example. Had a lot of issues with loitering and drinking outside of Payless Liquors here. We got the liquor store now routinely cleans up trash. And one of the issues is that these windows were boarded over. Well, that wasn't our standard. And there was some confusion. They're like, well, they're not windows anymore. So is that a window covering? Well, and there's been a lot of this in the Colfax corridor with covering over of doors and windows and all of that, and just kind of walling off from the street and whatever. And it has a bad look. And you can see the improvement of the look of the area, at least in the immediate frontage of the liquor store, what that looks like, now that we forced them to have some visibility. It's not as inviting to loiter out there, and I have seen situations with liquor stores like this. Liquor stores, for whatever reason, love to cover their windows. And I think part of it's because of distributor advertising. But, you know, it's not the same as having cameras. They always tell me, well, we've got cameras. Well, it doesn't feel the same. And are you really watching that camera the whole time? And so we'll see minors out here, you know, hey, can you buy me a beer? Or, you know, or somebody that they won't sell an alcohol, you know, beverage to anymore because they're suffering from alcohol addiction. And, you know, they feel less comfortable loitering when they can be readily observed. You know, and here's another example, the old Del Norte bar. You know, you had the operational issues of that, but then adding that Windows natural surveillance to it, how much more inviting it is for the area, you know, and upgrading the landscaping and so on. So just a very visible effect of that, and that feel of natural surveillance, that open window, that, you know, that glass, and how that makes you feel when you walk through areas. So a lot of this is, how do you feel in the areas? And if it doesn't feel safe, why? You know, and you start looking around and you put that lens on. And so once you actually kind of learn that lens, you start to look at the physical environment differently when you're in those areas, and start going, huh, well, this is interesting. You know, here, this was actually an image taken from one of our CPTED presentations over at the Ranger Motel, overgrown landscaping. You know, it just doesn't look good. People can hide back in there, throw trash in there, whatever. It doesn't show that the area's cared for. You know, like I said, mechanical surveillance is the term we use for cameras. You can kind of supplement when you can't see. And so CPTED has a landscaping 2-6 rule. So bushes, no higher than 2 feet. Trees need to be up above 6 feet. So you keep that 2 to 6 area, 4-foot area, ideally clear. And so if you start looking in areas that you say, wow, this doesn't look cared for, look at that landscape and you'll go, yeah, that's one of the factors that I'm seeing is, you know, that there's branches coming off, the shoots coming off the bottom of the trees, the bushes are overgrown, and yeah, you know, there could be anything hiding in there, right? Kind of natural feeling. So that's natural, kind of a quick rundown on natural surveillance. I'm going to try to keep rolling here to stay on time. Natural access control, you know, it's what kind of materials you have. It's not necessarily fencing always, you know, it can just be kind of landscaping. You know, you could also decide what plants you want. You know, if you could even use thorny plants as kind of a target hardening defense measure. You know, I think one thing that's good is, you know, having fences like this, fences that are you can see through, are ideal, and especially if they look nice, right? Because you want to look like it's cared for. So not necessarily just chain link or barbed wire. I mean, if you see razor wire, it's, you know, obviously very defensive, but it also kind of tells you, well, it's high crime here, right? Because why is there razor wire? It's not very inviting, right? So, you know, a natural access control is talking about all these kind of features to guide people. So, and that can include everything: lighting, landscaping, fencing, public art, colorful design elements. You know, here you've got the little gates that were here at General's Park. You know, and nice fencing to help illuminate the area. And, you know, you've got the lighting there at the entrance and the lights over the gates. You know, what does it look like? You know, here you got the campus, you got the entrance to the city, you know, nice monument sign there. You know, what's kind of coming in. There's your entrance to the medical campus, you know, good broad sign there. Obviously, you can go a lot deeper into this, but just some quick examples I put in there. Territory reinforcement, that's, you know, you know, just more of those kind of, you know, not necessarily defensive measures, but you know, making clear delineation that where, you know, the public-private spaces are, you know, and semi-public, and kind of what do those spaces mean, you know. And here at the Carriage Motor Inn, it's like, you know, you had a lot of issues with, you know, this was a nuisance property, and, you know, adding a fence was one of the measures to help defend that property, but not necessarily making it look bad, but, you know, helping add reinforcement to it. Activity support is part of CPTED. So part of that environment, do we have the community engaged, activated? Are we bringing in positive activity to these locations? Particularly if it's an unsafe location, you want safe activities. It's an unsafe location, yeah, you know, safe activities is the opposite on the other way. I can say that right. But you know, strategic placement of those activities, you know, here in Fletcher Plaza, you know, you can see an event here that was advertised by Visit Aurora, you know, to help, you know, positively activate the site. So it's part of it. We did that last year with Colfax and Havana too, having a couple resource fairs to try to engage the community and take back that area. Maintenance and management, these are from CPTED study here. I will tell you, if you go to MOK today, you know, see that front of the building, you can't see the front of the building. That tree's in the way. And actually that tree was doing damage to the building. And Parks did remove that tree. They ended up deciding to take that out. That particular tree. Unfortunately, it's, you know, nice, good green tree, but it was not in the best of locations, and we'll need to find new locations for that. But we are having some maintenance management issues up there along Colfax, you know, and these are in front of the MLK Center. That sign has deteriorated, so we're looking at, you know, removing that and replacing it. And then, you know, at some point getting resources to replace those trees. But, you know, it's almost worse to have a stump there and missing pavers, you know, than just having it paved over. But ideally, you want a tree there. You know, you want it to look good with the landscaping. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Colfax and Havana, because this was a really hot issue last year where we really tackled this area. This was an open air drug market that had developed right here on the corner. And, you know, there was news about this. It impacted neighboring Iola Street when it kind of attacked this corner. And we really did use the concepts of CPTED to clean this up. And they said, you know, we're hearing that it's much better these days than it was. It was a 90-day goal to try to tackle it. And that involved a lot of partners. The business partners here, we had regular monthly meetings with the property owners in the area. 7-Eleven was on those calls, RTD, RTD Police, you know, multiple of our departments, and you know, really just how do we kind of attack this? And so a few things I wanted to point out in this picture. So first of all, when this building was built, the critical error, the back of the building faces the street. There's no natural surveillance here. I think this was, you know, this basically closed itself off from the street. And then you've got the bus stop here, which can be a positive and negative activity generator. We know transit stations can have a lot of issues near them. Well, now you have no natural surveillance on that transit station, and the street doesn't count. High traffic street doesn't, you know, people aren't really stopping to look. They're busy driving their cars. And so you've got an old bus stop here in the front, you know, a lot of space to hang out. You know, we had a lot of drug dealing here, camping, whatever. You've got, you know, at least you've got the modern RTD station on the other side. And so what's happened here, this is a more recent picture, you know, with it cleaned up. But some steps we had to take, you know, with putting the fencing across the back here to try to get control of what was basically a dead space that didn't have, you know, a real purpose. So when you talk about CPTED, what's being done with the space, those bushes are still a little too high, but, you know, at least they're fenced in. You know, and so people were obviously getting behind those, and you had activities back there, you know, and then, you know, fencing off like the rock space on the left, and that was done on the right. So you're using a lot of territorial reinforcement. You know, I think in a better world, you know, this would have been designed a lot differently. You'd have windows on this side. Maybe you'd have a coffee shop in here. You'd have a restaurant. You know, it'd be a lot more welcoming environment, or you'd have some type of use of this space. But all it is the back of a building facing the intersection. So I think this was a kind of a disaster as far as the design of it, especially with all the other factors coming into play when you talk about the Colfax corridor. So, you know, and so we did implement CPTED measures. Those did help, you know, they help an extent, but, you know, at this point, you're kind of reactionary. Improve the lighting around here. You know, this place is lit up at night. The new bus stops are much better. They're much more CPTED design. You know, the one on the right, it's got cameras in it, you know, so on and so forth. So, and this is cleaned daily too. That's another defensive measure. Also at Colfax and Havana, you've got the Walgreens here, which had a ton of problems. You know, part of it is there's just this dead spot parking lot back here. It has excessive parking. They had this area they couldn't monitor, control, or watch. That's way back here. And so they even have food trucks set up here that didn't have any permission. They had campers back here. And then you've got the area around the back of the Walgreens that has no national surveillance either, that had a lot of drug use activity back there, you know, which would then impact the Walgreens because then they were stealing from the Walgreens. And I had a lot of personal observation of that. The 7-Eleven was also, you know, convenience stores in general can be negative activity generators, you know, for various reasons. They are hangouts. This one in particular was bad. We observed drug dealers that would park at the gas pumps or on the other side of the lot and would sit there for hours dealing drugs without the staff doing anything about it. The design of the building I don't think is particularly great. You know, you've just got the wall that faces Havana here. You know, you got the back. You know, actually here in the front, you can see a SEPTED measure that took place because there used to be a step in front of that door that was changed to a ramp because people were sitting on it. And so, you know, and part of it, and now it plays opera music. So kind of a defensive measure to stop the loitering around it. And so, you know, we had them improve the lighting out here, had them remove a air station, did some fencing on the other side where there was a hangout area. They removed the propane tanks, you know, and then engage the staff better to actually control the security in the area. So, yeah, I just put this image in because basically look at this side of a Maverick. Here you've got a dining area, you've got it set back from the street, you've got more delineation as far as your natural access control. You know, they got bollards to stop cars from driving into it, but you know, the layout's different from this, you know, and so this are already a little bit more set up for success on it. This I saw at Colfax and Havana because I wanted to touch on lighting. The lighting, first of all, Colfax should be a pedestrian area, I think is what we talk about, but that lighting is how many feet tall? And so it's really there to illuminate the street. They're spread out. It's also blocked by that tree. So there's no lighting where this, you know, on the end of this curve, there's no lighting here. So you got to think about where that landscaping is as well. And so that's part of your, you know, lighting it up, surveillance at night. Lighting's huge as far as SEPTED, but also the part of the training they talk about is ensuring that you don't have light pollution. So the type of lighting, the light structures, you know, where they're at, the even spread, are they illuminating the right things, and they shouldn't be matched up. And I'll tell you, you can see this in Fletcher Plaza too, where the light seems to be where the trees are. So even though it's at the right level, it's like, you know, you kind of want to, it should go tree, light, tree, light, tree, light, not light and tree. Doesn't work. So, you know, just kind of some more factors there. This was at Colfax and Nome, and this was a success story here. You know, that wall that used to be an old trash enclosure really was just a permanent hangout, and that was started to get drug and prostitution activity that was generated right there. Well, I approached that property owner in Topfa and said, well, can you just knock that wall out? And then they did that. Topfa had cut up all their weeds, which have now, this picture was from today, you know, they'd cut down. You can see on the left how there was so much overgrowth. Well, they cut all that down to the 2.6 standard. Now it's growing back. And this problem disappeared overnight. And I got very complimentary emails. Just disappeared. Wasn't welcoming to that element anymore. So, you know, just factor of that. Colfax and Havana area, just a few things wanted to highlight, you know, with that area because we looked at it so much. Kind of going from left to right here. We got Money Tree, Ace Cash Express, and Dollar X down on the right. You have 3 check cashing businesses in how far of a distance? So when you talk about negative activity generators, and we're working on an ordinance to try to address this from happening in the future, but why? You know, and I don't know how many we have in the city, maybe 24, and why do we have almost all of them right here? And I know the answer to that, but check cashing was interesting because I ran across an article when I was trying to deal with open air drug markets in relation to transit intersections. All of a sudden I saw one that said there was some correlation between check cashing, payday loans, alternative service providers, and crime at bus stops. And so then I went and looked and I said, holy crap, there's 3 of them here. I'm like, that's fascinating. So, and then you got a marijuana store. So you got, interestingly enough, because the marijuana store is so nice, we have so many restrictions on them. That's the corner we didn't really have problems with, but it's still, is that really healthy when you're trying to get this area cleaned up? You got the dead spot at the Walgreens. You also got the area behind the Walgreens that you can't see that has a solid fence between them and the church. Probably be a lot better with a chain link, with all the activity we had back in there. You can go back in there when they were open at any time and you'd see a lot of, drug related activity. I don't know that the Walmart was particularly well situated. Obviously, we talked about the building on the corner that faces the wrong way, or at least some design issues there. And then the entrance and exits on the Walmart on the south there are, I'm not sure those are the best. And then you just got that weird dead spot behind the 7-Eleven, but you've also got a weird spot in front of the 7-Eleven. I don't know how much parking a 7-Eleven needs or why they need a row of parking in the front there. But it was a great place to deal drugs or leave your car and take the bus, which would be more ideal. But yeah, it just had parking that was kind of further out there from the front, and just I don't know why it needed that. It seemed like you could have oriented the 7-Eleven differently and maybe put gas pumps on either side or something, and then had it a lot better, situated. So that kind of gives you the background of that. I'm almost wrapped up here. Risk terrain modeling. I just wanted to touch on this concept because this is an ordinance we're working on now and trying to figure out where it fits best. It's another concept out there that fits with CPTED or place network investigations, and all these really have an overlap because they kind of talk about the multidisciplinary teams, focusing on place to deter, to impact your crime stats, because crime is sticky to places. We see that. So if you can decrease crime in that place, your crime stats go down, right? It's proven that hotspot or focused efforts are effective and better than just kind of broad-based, let's hit everything at once, prioritizing your work. And so trying to look at that, and that would deal with the business types and how they relate to these other activities, but could potentially help inform, planning and zoning decisions as well. If we ended up adopting that methodology. So future plans, we've got additional staff training on CPTED, as I mentioned, next week. We're going to have a whole bunch of city staff that's outside of the police department for the first time have CPTED certifications. And I think in the future, Brandon and I were talking, as his staff is trained on that and how that is going to play into planning's work, coming back and maybe doing a more detailed presentation. I only have so much time today, but maybe a more detailed presentation on that now that you've had kind of the intro, and how that applies specifically for planning and zoning. And then, as I mentioned, the risk terrain modeling. So that's the end of my formal presentation. Questions?
Good job. It's a lot. I'm going to open it up, and Mike, you've got your hand up, so you go first.
Okay, so I have been going to a lot of the Ward 2 and mayor's town halls, and I've never heard of this term before. Is there an intent to start making these type of presentations at some of the ward town halls, just to make people more engaged or aware of what the city's doing in order to enhance the Colfax area?
Yeah, and I've brought this up at some of the neighborhood meetings up in Ward 1. But I think it's, like I said, it's not necessarily just the Colfax area. It's, you've got other areas and concepts. Right now, we're kind of in the earlier phases of more integrating it into our city culture. And from there, then we'll start to develop, how do we incorporate that more formally? Do you do resolutions? Do you encourage CPTED? Do you require it? I'm looking at, with certain business types, actually more formally requiring it by ordinance, as you've seen. And then, certainly I think with the number of staff that have this, it probably should be, depending on the timing at these presentations, it absolutely wouldn't hurt. Like I said, it's probably been done a little bit less formally. A lot of police use these concepts. A lot of it's common sense, but I think, as much as you'd want to integrate it and, whenever people are invited and we have time to do it, I don't see why not.
May we attend the training?
The training, well, the answer is, yes, it should be, the training for next week is full.
Okay,
NICP, does offer it, National Institute of Crime Prevention. It is, I believe it's open to the public, because I know we've got people from Walmart that are signed up for it, businesses sign up for it. There's just a fee for that training.
Okay.
So we could look at, I think we could look at having, a bigger introductory training that maybe we make available to you that maybe is on a 1-day period if you didn't want to do the full 4-day. So there's some options we could certainly work with on that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Commissioner Ranka?
I have a question. So, and I'm not sure who, Trevor, this may not be for you necessarily, but we are approving a lot of Quick Trip gas stations. And those Quick Trip gas stations, the back wall is to the street. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I was thinking you've got to drive in and enter from the non-street side, and there aren't windows on the back of these Quick Trips. Are we approving stuff just setting the city up for problems in these areas where, Quick Trip's one that comes to mind, but basically anything, it's like, it seems that the back side's to the street. And somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but should we be doing this, or should this be looked at going forward?
Well,
Well,
can I take
go
the
ahead.
first part of that, Brandon? And I
Okay.
won't get into the zoning on that. I was just gonna say, my reaction to that is just looking at the whole picture of that, because somewhere there's gonna be a back of a building. I will mention in risk train modeling, one of the reasons Kansas City really did clamp down on new gas stations was because they saw a correlation between that and crime. So thinking of those factors, you may end up having to make a decision anyway, with how do you kind of mitigate, what happens back there with those measures. So sorry, Brandon, go ahead.
No. I think, as we move forward, well, I think a lot of SEPTED concepts are integrated. SEPTED has been around for a long time. I think planners have incorporated bits and pieces of that, and now it's good that it's starting to be more specific again. I remember at the beginning of my career, SEPTED was more talked about than it was kind of in the middle teens, and now it's being talked about again, and I think that's a good thing. And I think it can help support some of the things that are already kind of approached in the zoning code when we talk about fenestration requirements, when we talk about having buildings with orientations to places where people are going to be. We have to work on streets as well, to have streets that are able to be related to better, where that the market does not feel they want to turn their back to a street, they want to utilize the street, and so that certainly can't be done in all locations. But, for example, when we talk about double, and even in residential neighborhoods, you talk about double frontage. Well, we have a double frontage variance here. That's essentially a SEPTED sort of idea there, meaning one, having a double frontage is not a logical maintenance ideal. People aren't going to take care of the back of their lot when it's along a street. It's not eyes on the street, it's not surveillance and all those things. So there's a lot of concepts that are kind of ingrained into the zoning code that support SEPTED. And then I think SEPTED can then reinforce some of those. It's not just silly planning ideas to have these things. These are supporting safer situations in most cases of surveillance and access and logical situations that are sustainable for those sort of situations. And also I'll say, over time, our zoning code is different than it was 25 years ago. And the market's different than it was 25 years ago. People wanted to use bigger lots and have a lot of extra space, and our zoning code pushed you in that direction as well. And so you have all these landscaping situations and kind of places that aren't very useful in some cases. And I think things are becoming more compact, and our zoning code is becoming more directed in where landscaping is expected to be. So I think that's a good observation, Sunny. And I think we kind of get halfway there with the gas stations, because we do try to get the, like Trevor pointed out, well, we got the canopy way out in front and then the building way back. We kind of split the difference now and get the canopy on the side. So there's kind of a little more compactness and ability to view the whole site more easily all at once. So it's a complex question, but I think ultimately CPTED supports a lot of the planning endeavors that were already kind of broached in the zoning code and reinforces them.
Thank you.
And Caitlin, I know, oh, go ahead.
Commissioner
Yeah.
Jejic?
You waiting for me? Thank you for doing this, Trevor. When I was working with the BID to begin with, we had tons of issues and nobody knew what CPTED was. I had to go through training and work with the power officers. And you get a call from like Havana Machine. Oh, I've got people fornicating in the bushes behind my business. So what do? I send the power officer out and we say, cut your bushes down lower so they can't hide back there. So I've got stories you wouldn't believe. So this is a really good start for Colfax because I know they have problems. We have a lot less problems along Havana because of CPTED.
Yeah, I think I'd chime in with Gail and say, even though for some people it's an obstacle, the landscaping overlay that we put on the Havana bid, it was geniusly done in such a way that it really follows CPTED. So Gail really, I think, took that training and the work with the PAR officers, which PAR, they use CPTED in practice every day when doing their security visits to businesses. And it's really an indicator of how, as we improve that district, as future projects are done there and certain code triggers apply, we're able to apply the overlay and CPTED and clean up a lot of the landscaping and work on some of the fence boundaries and work on several issues that you've highlighted today, Trevor. So it is a very functional, workable method of helping to curb some of these nuisance issues through planning and zoning.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Other commissioners? Trevor, I do have a question, and that is, how do regulations, for lack of a better word, rules like this, if they were to be put in an ordinance and go beyond a recommendation, how does this interact with rights of business to select and to do business in a particular area, where all of a sudden they may not be welcome anymore because it's a combo liquor store, vape shop, marijuana store, and a hookah lounge.
Mm-hmm.
And they want
Yeah.
to be grandfathered in, and, how dare you take away my right to do business? How does this logistically work?
Yeah, so, and I think you saw with the Lakewood ordinance, it was specific to marijuana because they were worried about it, the fact of what they were selling, they wanted that requirement on that type of business. So if you do requirements, maybe particular types of businesses, you put some additional requirements on those types to make sure, that they don't have that impact. But I think you also were kind of getting into what I called risk terrain, which was, and as CPTED would call it, they call it negative activity generators, right? So, if you put that liquor store, liquor store, pawn shop, vape shop, now you've got nothing but negative activity generators, that have been studied to correlate with crime, when you do that. So, you kind of build that into your code a few different ways. What we're looking at is not just spacing a liquor store from a liquor store, but maybe a liquor store from a pawn shop. So you don't over concentrate, negative activity generators or put them near sensitive areas like, maybe a transit station. Maybe you don't want a liquor store next to a transit station because now you're kind of increasing those elements, right? That risk elements. So I think your question's probably multifaceted in that, that type of business, we want you to do certain things. If you're going to be a bar, we want windows, or if you're going to be a liquor store, frankly, if you want to be a liquor store, you should have good window frontage so that you don't have minors hanging out up front trying to buy alcohol. You should have good surveillance to prevent that type of activity that is specific to your type of business that is SEPTED. But then you've got the bigger question of, where do they go? How many do you have to try to prevent, those unfavorable areas? And that's, so you can incorporate that in multiple different ways, licensing or zoning.
Commissioner Judgick?
Okay, one thing I did not see mentioned, we had a terrible issue with the trespassing, and I had to work with each of the property owners, 500 of them, to get specifically worded, no trespassing signs posted on the properties. Is that not a requirement any longer?
From my understanding, that is a requirement, that they want the trespass letter, they want some type of, because you got to be able to prosecute it. So they are asking for those trespass letters, and to have it well posted so that it could be prosecuted, and I've seen those kind of funny, I was at the People's Building, they got the sign way up high, which, normally you put a sign here, but it kept getting vandalized, but they just wanted to meet the legal requirements, they could prosecute it.
Yeah.
So,
All right, thank you.
yeah.
I think to add some clarity there, we had a PAR actually speak on this last night in an APD listening session, and they didn't mention any requirement to post, only the requirement to have a letter on file, which is now there's a new letter out. And so we push that information, and it's renewable every 2 years, or unless there's a major management change at the property. So that was interesting that he didn't talk about any signage or posting requirements, only the letter requirements.
Yeah, and having had conversation with Schulte on this, you get, there's got to be some type of delineation to help them support that. Like we talked about there, your natural access control, and the signage, helps support that prosecution. But otherwise, you go in there and it's like, if it's a public, if it's an area open to the public, well, hey, get out of here, and all you're doing is telling them to get out of here every time, rather than are they really supposed to be there or not?
Yeah, the only differentiation is though on your property, like your residential property, you're not required to post trespassing. You can prosecute trespassing against anyone that you don't want on your property, whether it's posted or not, as long as you're the witness to the move to trespass. The police just need something that's prosecutable. And that letter, he said specifically last night, the letter stands as their reason to prosecute. So it was just interesting.
Other questions? Brendan, you have a comment? Your hand is up.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to thank Caitlin for going. It was a full-time all day long for 5 days, so it was a major commitment to go. She had to scramble to get back and catch up on all her normal work. And then she has 3 full days next week. So I really appreciate her going. Caitlin, I don't know, do you have any comments to add tonight? And thanks for joining us tonight as well.
Sure. Thanks, Brandon. It's definitely been my pleasure, and, grateful that I got to go, and for Trevor for, making the training happen as well. I don't want to take up too much more time, but I think one of the things through this process that has really stood out to me is, as I'm reviewing permits and development applications, how many of these SEPTED concepts are already coming up as they already exist in our code. So it's helping me, I think, understand some of the intent behind different regulations that maybe I hadn't understood before. And it's also helping me have those conversations with applicants. So just briefly, some things that come to mind would be like landscaping requirements and buffer requirements, talking about that territorial definition, as well as defining that celebrated entrance into and around a property. That's something that you kind of think about intuitively, but now I have this class and this training to back that up and explain to applicants in the future how, little things like that can actually help prevent crime or the perception of crime in the future. Another thing that comes up a lot for me is fences and our fence regulations, and having more information about like natural surveillance and the natural access control to back up the reason why we have certain fence design standards is already helping me a lot in those conversations. And I think it's great that Kelly was part of that training too, as, kind of a landscape specialist, because I was surprised to learn how much landscaping really is a core part of these CPTED principles. So I think it's great that she also got to take the course as well. And I know that she and I both look forward to, after this advanced course, and Trevor too, to coming back, if it would be valuable, to give you all a more thorough or detailed breakdown of what we learned during the certification process. But yeah, definitely learned a ton that I'm already implementing, and am very happy to see that a lot of these principles are already codified. Yeah.
I have a
Thank you.
question.
Yes, Commissioner Bush.
I really appreciate this presentation. And my only question, Trevor, is, and Gail, since we already have some of these in place, what are the successes that we have? Like with Masons, they're a success with a filling station across the street, a grocery store that is not, the most beautiful grocery store, very little trees and landscape, but they are a success. And I think there are other successes like the apartment building that's across from the library, and it's been there for about almost 20 years, and it still has a real strong look, vibrant look to it. So have we looked at some of the successes, and or are there monetary successes, or are they crime being lowered, and use that as a selling tool to not just have people do something because they are forced to do it, but have them to do it because it increases my revenue, it lowers my crime, and I really just want to know how to do this. So that's my question. Gail. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, what we did on Havana to begin with is I got all the business owners that were within the area connected. And so if one business did something CPTED wise, they would share it with the other businesses. For example, we had several of the immigrant businesses having their cash register right next to the window. So they could see, whoever was standing out there, oh, there's cash in that drawer, and then they get broken into. So we had to get them all communicating with each other and sharing what's worked and what's not working. And that was a good thing to do.
And I can say one of the best examples of success is if you look in the Motor Mile, a lot of ways that the car dealer lots were designed, and now as they're going through redevelopment and they're improving those properties, they're absolutely using provisions of CPTED with our overlay. The most successful is probably the natural access control. If you look at the way, like for instance, Larry H. Miller, the way that their remodel happened, that corner of Alameda and North Havana, they use the tiered landscaping, and then they use their monument sign to create a natural boundary on that corner, which that corner used to be a huge loitering corner right at Alameda and Havana. And that type of natural barrier for the property has actually, it's not only a beautiful corner now with really nice landscaping and the monument sign at the top, but it's actually now a natural barrier against going on to the Larry H. Miller property. And if you see that, they carry that style of natural access control landscaping all the way through that property. And a lot of the other Champ renovations are doing the exact same thing. They're taking that cue. And I think that's a major success.
Okay. That's great. I just think that's a great selling tool.
Just North Dayton Street by Stanley Marketplace has changed dramatically using all these concepts.
Trevor, you had
Right.
implied that there were some examples of things. The one that just comes to mind, you said, we told them to take down the wall. Who pays for that? Did the city step in and offer to implement some of these strategies on the city's dime? Or was the business faced with having to do that? Was the On Havana bid faced with being able to do loans for businesses that wanted to comply with these regs but didn't have the money? Who pays for this?
Well, so the city did do grants at one time, with some of the COVID relief funds for, a lot of, security improvements. And a lot of that was recommended by police who had, had this training. So that was one. In the case I showed you, the city didn't pay for that. I do know on East Colfax on the Denver side, Denver did a lot of their COVID relief funds on a lot of septet improvements, including they've done, by the way, if you drive, check this out at night, if you haven't noticed this, when you drive down East Colfax and you cross Yosemite, look at how that lighting changes. It's drastically different on the Denver side. So, it could be, that's another way you could help formalize it is you actually put money behind it and do grants to help fund it, but I think one thing that I don't think, Top Pho, the little bit they spent on the Bullards at Top Pho and that apartment complex, it was more than worth it for them to make that investment as far as their return.
Any more questions? Because we're running against time here.
I just wanted to add a final comment and a thank you to Trevor for putting this
Yes.
together. You took the suggestion. I appreciate you bringing this to the, presenting it to me sort of at that BAB forum. I think this is really valuable, and I thank Brandon and Janine and the department for allowing Caitlin and others to attend these trainings. I think these are not only common sense approaches to community safety, but also it's a way of zoning, landscaping, applying planning to properties that increase the value. So I think we've got multifold benefits from employing these sort of strategies. And I appreciate you bringing this forward to our study session and helping us dive in a little bit. Thanks, Trevor.
I would echo that and ask for a follow-up. I think this would be a very interesting policy discussion as we move this forward. Like Mike had said, possibly to ward meetings, which means to city council. But this is a literal policy shift or policy decision. So it would be quite interesting to see what council members individually have to feel about this. And, one of the things that you might, Trevor, include with the police is, if not this, what's the cost of policing in some of these areas? Because it's going up.
Right.
It just is. All right. Thank you very, very much. We will begin at 6:10. Have a quick bite to eat. We've got 2 things on the agenda, and we look forward to seeing you in a few.
All right. Thank you, Trevor.
Thanks,
Thanks
Trevor.
again.